How do you land a 30-ton metal behemoth when its legs have been shot away? This was not a theoretical question for one crew on one fateful day. It was a deadly reality. A crippled giant bleeding fuel and hope had to find its way home. Everyone who saw her, everyone who heard the desperate calls believed it would end in a fireball. This is the story of the pilot who defied that fate. It is February 22, 1944. The skies over Nazi-occupied Europe. The aircraft, a rugged four-engine Handley Page Halifax Mk3 heavy bomber, call sign M-Mother. Her crew, 7 young men of the Royal Canadian Air Force's 426th Thunderbird Squadron, based at Linton-on-Ouse, England. Their mission, part of a massive bomber stream attacking the industrial heart of Germany. But for M-Mother, the war was about to become intensely, terrifyingly personal. At the controls of Halifax M-Mother was a 21-year-old pilot from Toronto, Canada, Pilot Officer Elmer B. Barlow. His crew was a mix of Canadians and Britons, a band of brothers forged through 30 successful sorties over some of the most heavily defended targets in the Reich. The flight engineer, the navigator, the bomb aimer, the wireless operator, the mid-upper and rear gunners, each man was a vital cog in a complex machine. The strategic situation in early 1944 was one of relentless pressure. The Allied combined bomber offensive was hammering German aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, and cities around the clock. The Luftwaffe's night fighter force, equipped with advanced radar and upward-firing Schrage-Music cannons, was at its peak effectiveness. Every raid was a gauntlet run through a lethal arena of searchlights, flak, and predatory fighters. For Barlow and his crew, this night's target was Schweinfurt, a name already infamous for its ball-bearing plants and ferocious defenses. The success of the raid depended on the bomber stream maintaining formation and discipline. But as M-Mother droned through the inky blackness high, over the Rhineland, a silent hunter found her. A German Junkers Ju-88 night fighter, its radar signature masked by the clutter of the stream, slid unseen into the bomber's blind spot. The attack was sudden, brutal, and devastating. From below and behind, the Ju-88 Feet's Schrage-Music cannons ripped a line of 20mm explosive shells through the Halifax, fuselage, and right wing. The rear gunner, Sergeant F.R. Onley, never saw it coming. In an instant, the aircraft was shattered. Shells tore into the starboard inner engine, setting it ablaze. Incendiary rounds chewed through the fuselage, wounding the wireless operator and starting small fires. The most critical damage, however, was hidden in the belly. The hydraulic lines were severed, and the entire starboard main landing gear assembly, the massive complex structure that held one of the bomber's 2 sets of wheels, was shot clean away. Inside M-Mother, chaos reigned. Acrid smoke filled the cockpit. The scream of the damaged engine and the rush of freezing air through new holes created a deafening cacophony. "Fire in starboard inner," Barlow heard over the intercom as training took over. "Feather the prop. Hit the extinguisher." The engine fire died, but the aircraft was grievously wounded. She lost altitude and speed, falling out of the protective bomber stream, a wounded bird alone in a sky full of hawks. By 23 hours, Barlow had stabilized the aircraft on 3 engines. But a routine check by the flight engineer revealed the true horror of their situation. The hydraulic pressure was 0. A manual crank confirmed it. The starboard wheels were gone. Only the port main gear and the nose wheel appeared down and locked. They were flying a 30-ton machine with half its landing gear missing. The navigator, Flying Officer Lloyd S. E. Bryant, plotted a course for the nearest friendly territory, England, over 350 miles away across the hostile North Sea. For 3 agonizing hours, Barlow nursed the shuddering Halifax westward. Every minute was a battle. The aircraft was sluggish, vulnerable to any remaining night fighters. The crew jettisoned everything they could to lighten the load: guns, ammunition, even the damaged escape hatch. The bitter cold of the high altitude seeped into their bones. They were exhausted, wounded, but alive. As dawn's gray light began to stain the horizon, the English coast appeared, a thin, beautiful, terrifying line. They had survived the long retreat, but now faced the impossible task ahead. They radioed ahead to their home base at Linton-on-Ouse. The message was stark: main starboard undercarriage missing, preparing for crash landing. On the ground at Linton, the emergency was declared. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway, their crews waiting with a grim sense of inevitability. Control tower operators watched through binoculars as the scarred Halifax made its final approach. They could see the gaping hole where the landing gear should be. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. A Halifax landing on its port gear alone would immediately dig that wing into the tarmac. The aircraft would cartwheel, break apart, and almost certainly explode, killing everyone inside. In the cockpit, Elmer Barlow ran through his options. There were none. Bail out over the airfield? His wounded wireless operator couldn't parachute. Ditching in a field? The uneven terrain would guarantee destruction. He looked at his crew, their faces pale and set in the dim cockpit lights. They trusted him. He was their pilot. The weight of that command decision settled on his 21-year-old shoulders, a crushing, immense burden. He began the final descent. The runway stretched out before him. He lowered the flaps. The nose wheel was down. The port main gear was down. On the starboard side, nothing but air and a jagged stump of metal. The airspeed dropped. 120 knots, 110. The threshold of the runway rushed up to meet them. Port gear confirmed down, sir. Starboard, nothing. Hydraulics gone. He flared the massive aircraft, lifting the nose ever so slightly, trying to keep the starboard wing up for as long as humanly possible. For a fleeting second, the Halifax hung in the air, balanced on a knife's edge between flight and catastrophe. Then, the port wheels shrieked as they touched the tarmac. The instant the port wheels made contact, the immense bomber began to veer violently to the left. Barlow applied full right rudder and aileron, fighting the pull with every ounce of his strength. The starboard wing, lacking the weight and drag of its wheels, stayed aloft, but not for long. The port landing gear strut groaned under the entire weight of the aircraft. And then, Pilot Officer Elmer Barlow executed a maneuver born of sheer instinct and brilliant airmanship. He did the unthinkable. He stalled the aircraft. By gently easing back on the control column and cutting power, he allowed the heavy right wing to drop, not violently, but with controlled force. The massive, reinforced engine nacelle of the dead starboard inner engine, the same one that had been on fire hours before, made first contact with the concrete runway. A shower of sparks, a deafening scream of tearing metal, filled the air. The Halifax shuddered like a living thing in agony. Barlow now had one point of contact, the port wheels, and two massive improvised skids, the starboard engine nacelle and, seconds later, the fuselage itself near the wing root. He was no longer landing an aircraft. He was guiding a 30-ton sled, fighting to keep it straight as it carved a path of sparks and torn metal down runway 28. The noise was apocalyptic. The crew braced for the impact that would end them. But Barlow held the yoke, his arms trembling with the strain, his eyes fixed ahead. The bomber began to slow, its kinetic energy dissipating in the long, grinding slide. It slid for over 500 yards, a comet of sparks and noise in the morning light before, finally, agonizingly lurching to a stop. Silence. Then the crackle of small fires starting. Abandon aircraft. Now. Barlow's command broke the stunned silence. The crew, moving on pure adrenaline, scrambled through the hatches and away from the wreck. The fire trucks raced forward, dousing the smoldering engines. Within minutes, all 7 men of Mother were accounted for. Miraculously, despite the ferocious attack and the catastrophic landing, there were no fatalities. The wounded wireless operator and others with minor injuries would recover. They stood in the cold English dawn, watching smoke curl from the wreckage of their aircraft. They were alive. Against every odd, against every expectation, they were alive. The ground crews who approached the Halifax saw the evidence of the impossible, a deep, singular gouge in the runway from the port wheels, and 2 parallel, shorter scars from the starboard engine and fuselage, the marks of a pilot who had invented a new way to land. For his exceptional courage, skill, and determination, Pilot Officer Elmer Barlow was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation specifically praised his great skill and presence of mind in executing the landing that saved his crew. The story of Halifax Mother became legendary within Bomber Command, a testament to cool-headedness under pressure and the unbreakable bond between a pilot and his men. It was a stark reminder that in the hellish calculus of aerial warfare, human ingenuity and courage could, on occasion, rewrite a seemingly certain ending. The pilot who landed a 30-ton bomber with no wheels lived to tell the tale. His crew returned to the war, carrying with them the memory of the night they cheated death. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.